What if I told you that humanity has existed for over 300,000 years, but everything you've ever learned as history only covers the last 5,000? So what happened during the other 295,000 years? Did nothing important happen? Or did we simply never write it down? Before we go any further, we need to answer one simple question. What is history? Most people think of history as a collection of events: wars, empires, kings, and revolutions. Ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome. But from a scientific perspective, history has a much more precise definition. History is the study of the human past based on written records. And that one detail changes everything. Because if something was never written down, it doesn't belong to history. So what do we call the time before writing? We call it prehistory. But that word can be misleading. It sounds like a time when nothing happened, a dark, empty void before civilization. But in reality, prehistory is where almost everything happened. It is where humans first appeared, where they learned to survive, where they adapted, evolved, and spread across the planet. It is not the absence of history, it is the absence of records. Let's go back to the beginning. Around 300,000 years ago, modern humans, Homo sapiens, emerged in Africa. They were not weak. They were not primitive in the way we often imagine. They were intelligent, social, and highly adaptable. They formed small groups. They communicated. They solved problems. And most importantly, they survived. For tens of thousands of years, humans lived as hunter-gatherers. They did not build cities. They did not farm. They moved constantly, following food and seasons. Their daily life was simple, but brutal. Find food or starve. Stay warm or freeze. Stay alert or die. They hunted animals. They gathered plants. They created tools from stone, bone, and wood. And over time, they began to master their environment. They learned to control fire. They improved their tools. They developed language. They built relationships and social structures. This was not a primitive existence. It was the foundation of everything that would come later. And yet, for all this time, there was silence. Not because nothing happened, but because nothing was written. Knowledge lived in memory. Stories were passed from one generation to the next. But memory is fragile. When people died, their knowledge often died with them. Entire cultures existed and disappeared without leaving behind a single written word. This is why we call it prehistory. Not because it was empty, but because it was unwritten. Then, around 10,000 years ago, something changed. Humans made one of the most important decisions in history. They stopped moving. They settled. This moment is known as the agricultural revolution. Instead of hunting and gathering, humans began to farm. They planted crops. They domesticated animals. They built permanent homes. And for the first time, they stayed in one place. This changed everything. Populations grew. Villages became larger. Communities became more organized. People began to specialize. Some farmed. Some built. Some traded. And as societies grew more complex, a new problem appeared. How do you manage information? How do you keep track of goods, trade, and resources? How do you organize a growing population? Memory was no longer enough. And then, around 3,200 BCE, in a region called Mesopotamia, humans invented writing. The earliest system we know is called cuneiform. At first, it was not used for storytelling. It was used for something much simpler: counting, recording goods, tracking transactions. But this simple invention had a massive impact. For the first time in human history, information became permanent. Ideas could survive beyond a single lifetime. Events could be recorded, stored, and shared. Humanity had found a way to remember. And this is the moment when history begins. Not with the first human, not with the first tool, not even with the first village. History begins the moment humans start writing things down. Because from that point on, we don't have to guess. We can read. We can understand. We can follow the past, step by step. Now think about this. If humans have existed for 300,000 years, and written history is only about 5,000 years old, then more than 98% of human existence was never recorded. Almost everything was lived, but never written. We know fragments, we study clues, but we don't hear their voices, we don't read their thoughts. We don't see the world through their words. So where does history actually begin? It begins the moment humans decide to leave a mark, to record, to remember. And from that moment on, the story of humanity becomes visible. In this series, we go back to the beginning. To understand today, we must understand the start. Next, before history.